This video will help you understand how much you are allowed to contribute to your retirement plans if you have more than one. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chris Dime. I'm a financial planner out of Edmonds, Washington, and I specialize in working with folks to and through retirement. It's not uncommon that as people change jobs throughout the year, they'll have had access to more than one retirement plan throughout a calendar year. In addition, it's also not super uncommon for people to have multiple W-2 jobs where in both jobs they'll have access to a retirement plan. More specifically, this is popular for part-time employees who maybe work at more than one institution. Given some of the changes with retirement accounts, part-time workers are starting to become eligible for retirement plans for certain employers, and therefore it's not uncommon that they might have a couple of different retirement plans. It's also not uncommon that in this gig economy, certain folks might have a W-2 salaried position at one employer with a 401k plan, for example, but they also might have enough self-employment income, or they might even run a full-fledged business on the side that provides them another retirement plan, like a solo 401k or a simple 401k plan, for example. This can oftentimes create some confusion around how much one is allowed to contribute to an employer-sponsored plan on the employee side. So in today's video, we'll break down what you need to know if you have access to more than one retirement plan, or if throughout the calendar year you had access to more than one plan. So let's jump in. For a quick refresher on some common ways in which people accidentally overfund their employer-sponsored plan, I'll link above to my previous video that breaks down a few examples. The bottom line is, for the tax year of 2024, if you're under the age of 50, your maximum contribution that you as an employee can make to your retirement plans in total throughout the calendar year is $23,000. If you're 50 or older, you're permitted a $7,500 catch-up contribution for most retirement plans, and that would allow you to fully fund $30,500 throughout the entirety of the calendar year. Now, this is specifically in the tax year in which you age into age 55. Of course, if you're older than 55, then you can do this. But in the tax year you age into age 50, then you are permitted to make that $7,500 catch-up contribution. You don't have to wait until you're actually 50 years old. As it pertains to retirement plans that the IRS aggregates together for the purposes of that contribution limit, those plans are going to be 401ks, 403bs, simple plans like simple IRAs and simple 401ks, as well as SAR-SEP plans. Now, quite frankly, after doing this for a little bit over a decade, I've never seen a SAR-SEP plan. We have to study it in all of our certified financial planner, doctrine and whatnot, but I've actually never seen those. Those are most likely going the way of the buffalo over the next few years, but if you read IRS website literature, which I don't really know why you would, but if you did, and you come across that, essentially it's another retirement plan. Now, for a side note on 403b plans, yes, you are permitted to make a $7,500 catch-up contribution if you're 50 or older. 403b plans also permit a special catch-up contribution for those who have been employed by that institution for at least 15 years. Those employees are permitted to make an additional $3,000 a year contribution into their retirement plan. And we'll cover this in a future meeting, but essentially you're allowed to double up if you're over the age of 50 with 15 years of experience or more with that employer. You're allowed to double up on a $7,500 catch-up contribution plus a $3,000 15-year employee catch-up contribution. Now, if you have access to a 457b plan, we're actually going to touch on that at the end of the video. There's different rules and regulations that pertain to those plans. For a quick bit of lingo that we'll use later on in the video, anytime an employee makes a contribution to a retirement plan, that's generally going to be called a salary deferral. And anytime an employer makes a contribution to a retirement plan, that's going to be called a match or a profit share. Now, while I've never seen it personally, technically, employers are permitted to cap retirement plan contributions to their retirement plans. And it's not necessarily just for arbitrary reasons. A lot of times it has to do with certain discrimination, testing, and things like that that go on in the background of their retirement plan that you don't really see as an employee. For example, your employer might max out contributions at $23,000 a year, and there might not be a age 50 plus catch-up contribution. And specifically, this is a problem when it pertains to Roth contributions. So employer-sponsored plans, for the most part, from everything I've seen, Roth contributions are permitted in almost every plan, but I have seen a number of plans that do not permit Roth contributions. It has to do with the background expenses of administrating Roth contributions versus pre-tax contributions. And so your employer might say, hey, you can max out your pre-tax account all day long, but we don't allow Roth contributions. This is a problem because the Secure Act 2.0 that passed recently mandated that any sort of catch-up contributions for employees making about 145 grand or more, it mandated that if you're over 50 and you're going to make an over 50 catch-up contribution, that catch-up contribution has to be made as a Roth contribution. Now you can imagine if your employer-sponsored plan doesn't permit Roth contributions, well then unfortunately you're totally SOL for making those age 50 catch-up contributions. So while they might not impose a maximum contribution as employee, ipso facto of limiting the ability to make Roth contributions, they might kick you out of making your age 50 catch-up contributions indirectly. Another way in which your contributions are going to be limited is if you don't earn enough income to max out that plan. Let's say, for example, you worked 11 months out of this year at a startup that didn't offer a retirement plan. But then in December, you switch to a job that offers the most amazing 401k plan in the world, but your compensation is 10 grand a month. Well, you don't make enough money to have maxed out that 401k plan within that calendar year. You only made $10,000. Therefore, most plans will not permit you to make more than $10,000 in salary deferral because you only had $10,000 in salary. Another point is your total compensation between, let's say, two employers, if you work two jobs simultaneously, if that doesn't exceed the $23,000 annual contribution limit for 2024, then you're not permitted to fund $23,000 into 401k plans in total. Contrarily, if let's say both jobs paid you $50,000 for a total of 100 grand, well that's obviously more than 23,000, so you'd be permitted to max out those plans. But you'd only be permitted to make $23,000 in total contributions. And whether you do $23,000 as a salary deferral into one plan, or $23,000 into another plan, or a combination of the two, most likely I'd recommend you look at the one that gives you the most incentives on the back end. Maybe one plan has matching and one doesn't. Well, obviously you fund the matching one for sure. But at the end of the day, you are responsible for tracking whether or not you overly contributed to your employer-sponsored plans based on the entire calendar year. The third-party administrators that run the retirement plans, they don't communicate with each other. So if you have two jobs that each pay you 50 grand each, and you over-contribute to both plans in total, so more than 23 grand, well then you're the one that's responsible for taking the money back out and dealing with the administrative nightmare that is that. For a refresher on how to pull money back out of a retirement plan, I'll link ahead here. Now, generally, I've heard this concern out there that, oh, if I fund my 401k, that'll stop me from funding an IRA, for example. Unfortunately, that's incorrect information. Your contribution to your retirement plan does not affect whether or not you can fund an IRA on the pre-tax or Roth side. For example, if you max out your 401k at $23,000, that doesn't necessarily mean you can't or can fund an IRA. There's different rules and limits that pertain to IRA contributions. Whether or not you fund your 401k, if you had access to fund one, that could affect your ability to fund an IRA or a Roth IRA. For more information and nuance on that, I'll link above to my previous video that breaks down whether or not you are permitted to fund an IRA, and if so, in which tax type and how much. The only type of IRA that is affected by your funding of a 401k plan is a simple IRA. The maximum to a simple IRA is $16,000 per year for 2024, and simple IRAs provide a catch-up contribution of $3,500, again for 2024, if you're 50 or up. The way I understand this, if you had a simple IRA in combination with like a 401k plan somewhere else, if you made $1 million, the maximum you could put into that simple IRA plan is still $16,000 because there's that limit there. And you'd at least need to make 7 grand, which if you made $1 million, then that's no problem. But you'd at least need to make 7 grand at a different employer to fund 7 grand into that 401k for a total contribution into employer-sponsored plans of $23,000. Now you might be concerned, okay, well, simple IRAs, that matters in combination with other 401k plans. What about SEP IRAs? Well, SEP IRAs don't have employee contributions. They're only funded by the employer. So it actually doesn't matter how much money you make relative to funding a SEP IRA because that's entirely employer funded. And employer maximum contributions, that's going to be beyond the scope of today's video. Now, I said in the beginning of the video, we'll talk about 457B plans because they're different than 401ks, 403Bs, etc. So let's jump into that now. For those of you who might have some familiarity with deferred compensation plans, I'm not talking about what are called non-qualified deferred compensation plans. Those are totally separate than 457Bs, and although they share similar nomenclature, totally different regulations and beyond the scope of today's video. Specifically with 457B deferred compensation plans, you can divide those into two main types. Governmental 457B plans and non-governmental 457B plans. Obviously, if you work for a government agency, you're going to have the governmental 457B plan if that agency offers it. And if you work for a different type of tax-exempt organization that isn't a government or a municipality, you'll have access to a non-governmental 457B plan, again, if the employer offers it. From the employee side of the house, it's relatively the same. From the employer side of the house, they're very different programs and definitely beyond the scope of today's video. The biggest thing to know about 457B plans, regardless of governmental or non-governmental, is they have separate salary deferral limits and are not aggregated together like 401k plans, for example, are. So said another way, if you have access to both a 403B plan and a 457B plan, you're actually permitted to contribute to both of them independently at least $23,000 each if you're under 50. Now, coincidentally, the maximum to a 457B plan is the same as a maximum to a 401k, namely for 2024 is $23,000. But specific to non-governmental 457B plans is they are not permitted to make age 50 catch-up contributions. So even if you're 50 or older, if you have access to a 403B plan and a 457B plan, only the 403B plan would allow you to make that $7,500 catch-up contribution, and your 457B would be limited at $23,000, again, for 2024. But of course, combined, right, that's $30,500 for the 403B and $23,000 for the 457B non-governmental plan. That's still $53,500 of money that you could either fully tax deduct or fully contribute as Roth. In contrast to non-governmental 457B plans, governmental 457B plans do permit age 50 catch-up contributions. So for 2024, that means if you had a 403B plan and a 457B governmental plan, and you made enough compensation to justify this, you could fund both accounts at $30,500, which is, what, $61,000? And again, if the plan documents are done like most plan documents moving forward in 2024, you could either fully tax deduct all of that and take a $61,000 tax deduction, or you could fully fund all that as Roth and never pay taxes on that money ever again. And that quick calculation doesn't even factor in the 15-year employee 403B special catch-up contribution that if you wanted to top it all off and combine everything possible together, if you have access to a 403B, a 457B, you're 50 or older, and you have 15 years of service with that agency or employer, then you're permitted to make $23,000 contributions plus $7,500 contributions plus a $3,000 15-year employee contribution to a 403B plan. In total, that takes you from $61,000 to $64,000. Again, all pre-tax or all Roth or a combination of the two. Now, there's one more feature to 457B plans that make them unique, and that's called the pre-retirement catch-up contribution, or it's called the last 3 years of employment catch-up contributions, which is additive to the classic $23,000 457B contribution. We're going to save that for another video because it's a bit nuanced, but just know that there's even more contributions that you could make into a 457B plan. The bottom line is, what you do with a 401k, 403B, etc. does not affect what you can do inside of a 457B plan. Those contributions are not aggregated together, whereas access to a 401k and a 403B, for example, those salary deferrals would be aggregated together, and you are not permitted to make more than $23,000 in contributions, or kind of whatever your total limits are for the calendar year. There's no double dipping on those types of plans. But there is double dipping if you have access to a retirement plan, a 401k, 403b, whatever, and a 457b plan. Okay, so while that was a lot, here are some quick calls to action. Number one, I would double check what you have access to as an employee, which of course you can email HR and scrub your employee handbook, which comes out new every year for the most part. Specifically for those who have access to a 403b plan and a 457b plan, it'll definitely make some sense to ensure you're at least aware of what your total contributions are. Now, you might not be able to afford to save enough to max out both plans, but at least knowing what the possibility is might motivate you to find some extra savings around and maybe increase your salary deferral in total. So hopefully that was helpful in demystifying what your contribution maximums are depending on your situation. If you have further questions, drop them in the comments below or get in touch on the website. We'll help you get squared away. Have an awesome rest of your week, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.